hopefully is coming back. Oh, here's John.
There she is.
Thank you. Thank you for staying. Listen, if I could give you all a steak dinner or a milkshake or something for anybody on the last day on a Friday at 4:30 who's hanging, so you're dedicated. So those of you who sat through the first two panels, which were excellent, let me just share with you that their stories. And then when you go to the government, if you don't have the right message, it's all going to fall apart. So you can have intent, you can have strategy, you can have a coalition, you can have a cause, but what we're going, the three panelists today, and I'm going to introduce them, what they each bring to you, they're going to tell you their experiences, how they crafted a message that really cut through the clutter and helped them resonate. And if it didn't, what did they learn? So I would like to begin. To my far left is Chelsea. So Chelsea, you get 60 seconds. We're going to do this a little bit like a talk show. Let's shake it up. Okay? So I'm like Bob Barker. Chelsea, 60 seconds. What do you want the audience to know about you, Chelsea Hedquist?
I like long walks on the beach and getting caught in the rain. No. I am a communications professional. I've been doing communications for probably about 15 years. Before that, I was a journalist. I have worked in communications for the United Nations Foundation. For a long time, I was with the World Health Organization, and now I am Director of Public Affairs and Advocacy for the Lantos Foundation for Human Rights and Justice, which is a small nonprofit focused on human rights issues.
John Maran, what do you want us to know about you?
That I am a Christian American, who was born and raised not too far in Northern Virginia, and I somehow co-founded this organization called Global Movement for Human Democracy, also created GN4MD, and we're basically a youth network that is really using our voice at this time to raise awareness about what's happening in Burma.
Thank you. And Pari, what would you like to share about your background that the audience would know before you begin?
I am Ibrahim. I'm the founder and executive director of the Free Yazidi Foundation. I'm a Yazidi. My people in Iraq were targeted by the Islamic State because of who they are. The genocide was committed, and we had to be very, very clear in our messaging, and you'll hear about that more today.
So we have Lantos Foundation, UN, World Health Organization, someone from her bedroom when she was college room when she was 18 years old, created something that people listen to, and a Yazidi, and we know the plights of the Yazidis. So before they share, I'm just going to say 3 points as an umbrella. First of all, if you want a campaign, how many of you know Nathan Weiniger at the State Department and he used to be at 21 Wilberforce? He was my partner in crime 4 years ago. We spent the summer creating a 6-part series on how to advocate. Literally, I took a camera, I filmed him on Capitol Hill, and we came back and wrote 2-pagers front and back that anybody, you can hand it to a high schooler, you can hand it to a grandmother. They can read it and they can not become an expert, but they can feel some confidence to get involved. And one of those we're going to talk about just in 5 minutes. I'm only 5 minutes and then it's them. It's crafting your message. So what you need to know, listen very carefully. Words matter. Words matter. When you show up, it's better to say less and to be on point and to be relevant. So when a message, it should be simple. And so many people come to us that we work with training, And we say, what is your issue? And they hand me, because you're so passionate, you hand us a 3-page single-spaced statement. I need 2 sentences. You need 2 sentences. Then for other audiences, you can build on that, and it can be a paragraph. It can become a half page. It can become a page. So one of the things in your message that you want to do is create a statement that is simple. You can have the academic thesis. There is a place for that. You can have a literature review. There's a place for that. But let me tell you something very clear. There is not a place. Most people don't want to talk to you. They're busy. They're not into your issue. And so you want a clarity and a simplicity and brevity with what you're going to speak to them. So what you want to do is 3 things. Define your problem in your statement. Who will be impacted? And what is your ask or the solution? Define the problem. Who will be impacted? And what is the solution? By the way, we have a handout for everyone today that we're going to give you, and a worksheet that you can use. And I know, again, we mentioned her earlier. We have the president of the Leah Shirabu Foundation here. But what I want to say to you, Gloria, I wrote this 6 years ago. Let me read you something. When Congressman Wolf and I and Wilberforce came back from Nigeria, and nobody was talking about Nigeria. And here was our statement. Nigeria, fractured and forgotten. Injustice and a lack of inclusive government that falls along ethno-religious fault lines threatens the stability of Africa's most important nation. Among the most 25 populous countries in the world, they are highest in religion-related hostilities. They're at a breaking point, one that the U.S. cannot afford to ignore. Swift and precise policy decisions and a partnership with Nigerian civil society can have profound stabilizing effects. That was 6 years ago. You could still say it's true or worse today. But you know what? The statement got us in when nobody cared about Nigeria. And so it's not about what we do, but the pressure's on. You just even sometimes have to have the statement to get the appointment, to get the meeting. So without further ado, I'm going to leave you hanging on that. By the way, 21wilberforce.org. There's a 6-part series. We're willing. We offer these trainings through the IRF Roundtable. We can do trainings. They're all free for 2 hours or 4 hours. But let me now turn it over to the people who are actually working on the ground. And I'm going to begin with Chelsea. And Chelsea's going to share about her views on this and a particular case that resonated with her. Go ahead and take this one.
It's really nice to be with all of you today. I want to begin actually by briefly telling you about something that I learned from someone who's a lot smarter and better at advocating than I am. How many of you have heard the name Erwin Kotler? Anyone? Yeah, he's probably the preeminent human rights lawyer of the last 50 years. He has helped free political prisoners like Natan Sharansky, Nelson Mandela, and many other names that you would recognize. Most recently, Raif Badawi is one of his clients. And I was fortunate enough to sit in on a conversation he had with Katrina Lantos, who's the co-chair here and also the president of the Lantos Foundation. And they were talking about his experiences, and he said, you know, when I was first representing Natan Sharansky, that was really when I developed what he calls the advocacy model for political prisoners. And my ears pricked up because I love a good model that we can all take and adopt and learn from and use. And what he said, which has really stuck with me, is that when you are advocating for a political prisoner, You have to use every single leverage point, every single pressure point. You have to bring all of those to bear on the human rights abuser, on the oppressor, and you have to push on all those advocacy points and all those pressure points until you reach the tipping point. And that tipping point is basically when you make it more painful for the oppressor to keep their prisoner than to let them go free. And he told a very fascinating story where he had obviously been doing all of this advocacy work for Sharansky, but it wasn't until years later that he was speaking on a panel with Gorbachev when he said to Erwin Kotler, he said, you know, I had gone on a trip. He wasn't the head of the country at that point. I think he was Minister of Agriculture, something very unrelated to human rights or Soviet refuseniks or anything like that. And he had gone on a trip to Canada, and because of Erwin Kotler's advocacy and civil society's advocacy, he had gone into meetings with all kinds of people unrelated to human rights, and those people had all said, well, what about Natan Sharansky? What are you going to do about that? And Gorbachev said, I didn't know the name Natan Sharansky until I went into those meetings. I had not heard that man's name. And I went into those meetings and they made it painful for me because instead of talking about agriculture deals, I had to talk about Natan Sharansky. And the moral of the story is it really works because Natan Sharansky did go free. So I just want you to be thinking in this session about the fact that advocacy has to come from a lot of different angles. I am really happy to talk about what Luann was just mentioning, the messaging specifically, because messaging is hugely important. But the message has to be delivered in a lot of different ways. It has to be delivered from different groups to different groups. And sometimes that messaging has to be quite targeted depending on who you're trying to reach. So some of the avenues might be legal avenues or multinational organization avenues like the United Nations. Sometimes the advocacy is with your own government. Sometimes it could be with a sympathetic government. You need to obviously engage civil society. And then of course there is social media today and earned media going directly to media organizations. So there's a lot of avenues at which you can find those pressure points and you can work to reach that tipping point that Erwin Kotler talked about. So really briefly, I'm just going to give you sort of a case study from the Lantos Foundation's own experience. This is not a political prisoner, a religious political prisoner, but he is absolutely a prisoner of conscience. How many people in the audience have seen the movie Hotel Rwanda? Oh, yeah, lots of people. It's one that really sticks with you. So the man who is depicted in that movie, played by Don Cheadle, is a man named Paul Rusesabagina. And everything you saw in that movie, Hotel Rwanda, is true. He was responsible for very courageously saving the lives of 1,200 or more Tutsis during the genocide in Rwanda. And in the years since then, he has become a very outspoken human rights activist and an outspoken critic of Paul Kagame's regime. Paul Kagame was long considered sort of the savior of Rwanda, but has also really become a full-blown dictator who has completely trampled on the rule of law and who stifles dissent, any form of dissent, in very brutal ways, including assassinating or imprisoning and torturing his opponents. So last year, actually no, it's going to be 2 years this August, Paul Rusesabagina got on a flight thinking that he was going to Burundi. He transferred planes in Dubai, and he was put on a private plane, unbeknownst to him, that took him to Kigali, where he was then thrown into prison. And he has been there now for almost 2 years. Paul Rusesabagina was awarded our premier human rights prize, the Lantos Prize, in 2011. So he was already really part of our family, so to speak, at the Lantos Foundation. And we have spent a large amount of our time in the past 2 years advocating for him. And I just want to give you a couple examples of the very different avenues that we have used to advocate on his behalf. One of the really powerful ways that we have advocated for him is through a mechanism that is called the Magnitsky sanctions regime. Has anyone heard of that? Mm-hmm. Yep. So this is probably the most powerful human rights tool that we have today to hold human rights abusers accountable. And the reason is because we can directly target those abusers. We can say this person or this corporation was directly involved in human rights abuse. Now, the unfortunate part is we can't just sanction whoever we want, but we do have the power as even a civil society organization to submit a filing to the US Department of State and the US Department of the Treasury, and to submit all of the evidence and to encourage them to sanction these individuals, which is exactly what we have done for two of the Rwandan government officials who were involved in the kidnapping, arrest, and torture of Paul Rusesabagina. But you can't just advocate with the State Department or with the Treasury. When we put out that filing, you better believe that we were all over the place with social media. We were all over the place with writing op-eds, with reaching out to reporters. And of course, we were doing our advocacy on Capitol Hill as well. Capitol Hill is a place where we have sometimes run into walls because Paul Kagame has a lot of friends on Capitol Hill, but we've also made some good inroads. We've had Congresspeople come together to sign letters in support of Paul Rusesabagina. We've had resolutions that have been brought to the floor in support of him. And it's not even just the US Congress where we have seen success. We've also seen success in the UK Parliament and also in the EU. So again, you really have to look at it as this multidimensional approach. You can't think this one op-ed is going to change everything. It's going to sway the world. You can't think this one meeting with a congressman or a senator is going to change the world. You sort of have to view it from every angle and keep thinking about where can I find more pressure points, more leverage points. And sometimes you have to think quite creatively. Recently, we actually were able to be part of a new effort which involves all kinds of celebrities. After a lot of, long and sustained lobbying to get Don Cheadle involved, he and many of his celebrity friends have also become involved in a hashtag Free Rusesabagina movement with shirts and with social media posts. Again, nobody thinks that Don Cheadle posting on Twitter or Instagram is going to free Paul Rusesabagina. But if we keep pushing all of these different points, Magnitsky sanctions, Congresspeople from the United States calling him out, celebrities on Twitter, on Instagram, wearing shirts proudly proclaiming that they stand with Paul Rusesabagina, the hope is that we will reach a point where it becomes more painful for Paul Kagame to keep this person who he fears, because he fears dissidents and he fears people who will oppose him or would unmask the true brutality of his regime. We want to get to that point where it is more painful for him personally to keep Paul Rusesabagina behind bars than it would be to let him go. And we haven't gotten there yet, but I think we're making progress.
Wow, thank you, Chelsea. Gary, would you share with us about, I think we know your issue, but if you want to recap, but how you've approached, the awareness is there, but there's still a long way to go. Why don't you share that?
Yeah, thank you. So in the beginning it was, let me start from the beginning, because in the beginning it was, we had to be very clear in the messaging. We wanted to make clear to the world that this was a genocide and the Islamic State needed to be stopped. Not only because they were committing a genocide against the Yazidis, but the Islamic State was becoming a bigger and larger organization that would do a lot of no good around the world as well, which later on we saw a lot of those things happening as well. But as the years go on, people forget about causes. New causes arise and new people need support. Now in this case, Ukrainian people. And then my people are forgotten and others are forgotten. But you need to keep going with the messaging. And there's a couple of things that we're trying to do. One of them is we go for just and accountability for individuals and companies and states that have their hands in what happened to our people, or one way or the other supported or were a platform. One of the things we see is that we gather evidence on perpetrators, and we see, for example, a European country being very not taking next steps to help these perpetrators accountable. So we're trying to gather as much information as we can, and we have told them that if you do not take the next steps, we will make this public politically. And then it's everywhere on the media, and we will share all the information we have on these perpetrators. And I have the feeling, and we've seen this now a couple of times, that when we keep information for the protection of survivors far in the background, and just deal with public prosecutors, etc., that in most cases they take very, very slow. But as soon as a journalist speaks about it, all of a sudden everyone is aware of it and they're already doing something. But we're already almost 8 years further, and I think we have like a few cases in Europe, and even that case on genocide, they're going in appeal. So in that sense, messaging is you need to be very, very clear. Aside from that, one last thing I want to mention is that like, we always say never again, but if like after a year or two, people already have forgotten about these people who have suffered immensely, so how do you keep that going? How do you keep the messaging going that like these people need support and this will happen again if we don't do something about this? How are we going to tackle the root causes? And that has something to do with messaging. What we're trying to do, aside from just an accountability, trauma treatment, we have started a bakery training center and a sugar sweet cafe, and we have a crafts and enterprise center that where the women make a brand called Chunky Animals. I'm talking about branding because that's the messaging you need to get out there. People, the Muslim community around the Yazidis, sees our people as devil worshippers, infidels. You cannot eat from their hands. You cannot, so it makes it very difficult for our people to become economic actors, be involved in businesses, etc. Let alone anything related to food. So our idea is like we make brands, whether it's food related or crafts related, the branding's message goes out there so that when people try it, they don't have to, maybe they know, maybe they don't know, but eventually they ate food from Yazidis, and then they'll know like, oh, what I've been taught since I was a little kid is not true. Because I'm still living, I ate the food of Yazidis, and nothing happened to me, And that's the clear message you want to get out there, because the next generation will only be fed information that is untrue about my people. And that's like what we're trying to really do.
So basically, I told her we should do a documentary. The Yazidi women are building bridges by baking bread. That's a powerful message, powerful story. They're going to talk amongst themselves, and you can ask questions of them, but John, would you share about how we heard from the other panels, the Rohingya, but tell them about your entree into it and the messaging you're using. She's one of those they talked about on social media. So,
thank you. Yeah, so I think this is a very good question, and thanks again for your answers. I'm going to try to keep it brief also.
can you speak up?
Yeah. In terms of messaging, when it comes to social media, you have to be very blunt, very sharp to the point, and just very quick, because nowadays everyone on social media, as you know, we're just scrolling. No one's going to really take the time to watch a 15-minute video, much less even a 4-minute video. It has to be even just a minute, But I also want to just touch upon the points that you mentioned, which I think is really great, about the senses. Sometimes you just have to keep it so simple to the 5 senses. Seeing, your eyes, keep something visually appealing when it comes to social media. Your ears, hearing, when you're chanting out on the streets or in protests. Something that always just pops up in my mind sometimes randomly, it's funny, it's like, Burma must be free, freedom, justice, democracy. It just rings in my ear, and it's very simple, but it's catchy, and like the rhyme, it sticks with you. So I hope it sticks with you too after this. And smelling, food comes in when you're having events and everything. You want to just make sure that people really connect. It's a human thing to be connecting with senses and all these things that we have, that we take for granted. Taste, that goes with food, and with cooking bread. These are all just great ways to put together something so simple in different ways. Sometimes all these senses come together. And I think with social media, what's definitely more is also feeling. when you're hearing and seeing in a way that is very punctual and to the point, it hits the heart, so you have to know how to.
So am I understanding how to distill it down when it's very complicated? It could be academic, you have all this data. Can I say one thing and then you'll start? So you've got a date before you get married. And so the thing is you may not be able to tell all your story in one point. You have it. I'll throw that to Chelsea.
Do you guys mind if I start? So I worked for 10 years for the World Health Organization. So if you want to talk about complicated and data-driven and really boring, that's what I did a lot of the time. But I think it actually comes back to something that Luann said in her introduction, and that is always focusing in on who it impacts. I think that is probably the most powerful point. If you have to choose one thing, you don't look at sort of like the big theoretical questions, or you don't necessarily dump all the data on them, but you tell them what the impact is, who is actually suffering from it. And I think that in a way that focuses it down enough and it really distills the issue and the problem. And if you hook them with that, then you can pull back a little bit and start showing them some of the other pieces.
Okay, let's go over to Pari first. Pari.
I think that you need to know your audience. Like if I go on the Hill, I'll have a specific thing to say. If I go and speak in front of USAID, I know exactly what I'm going to say. So every audience, State Department is different. Like every audience is different, and every audience, your request is different. So what you're going to say and what you want from them, and that's why you have to like change your what you're going to say every single time.
Okay, John, I've got another question for you. So I'm doing the power play. It's my question now. One of the things, having to do this is, what I meant by date before you get married is you're starting a relationship, you're starting a conversation. You can always follow up. You want to leave them hungry and curious. But one of the things you want to do is be relevant. So you want to be relevant, particularly social media. This is why I saved it for our social media maven. What did you all look at today in your news feed, whether it's Politico, Axios, Religion News Service, whatever's in the news today, you need to take one of those tidbits, take your issue, make it relevant. That's your tweet for today, because that's on their mind. How are you relevant? How are you going to, without getting on point, tie your issue into climate change, into the January 6th hearing? You're not going to go rogue and crazy, but this is what's on their mind. They're having a conversation. You want to join it and bring your messaging in. So John, what's the most crazy thing, but where you were relevant, but you saw it really break through some clutter?
Great question. I think the first thing that comes to my mind is just TikTok. So we know our audience, we want to be connecting with the youth as a youth organization. And the way to do that is, like Pari was saying, is to know your audience, know how they're speaking. If you're speaking to like higher level professionals, you're going to be speaking in a more high level, professional manner. But when it comes to kids, you can just break things down. Yep, the youth, we love to use slang all the time. Use slang. Use trendy music. We had a TikTok, for example, that was just about fun, and it didn't even have anything to do with the serious matters of Burma issues. We literally just dressed up in our cultural costumes and were dancing and just having fun and doing passing the brush kind of trend, and it blew up. So things like that to just capture people's attention, leaving them hungry for more. I think that was a great way to introduce people to the fact that we have so much cultural diversity in Burma. You use that hook, use something interesting. Leave them wanting to know more. Like, oh, what are they more about? Who are these cool people? Why are they on social media? What is their purpose? And once they follow you from that one introduction, they'll start to see, oh, okay, this is really cool. They're about fun and about advocacy.
Question in the audience. We have several others. Okay.
I have a quick question about, it's a little bit different, but how to outreach people, because I'm doing research on how to make minority voice heard, but sometimes it's so difficult once there is some stigma about sexual abuse. People do not want to talk about it, and for example, in Asia, I'm not stereotyping it, but we are not taught to speak up. So it's sometimes really challenging for me to make a oppressed people's voice heard. So I just wanted to know like, if there is any strategy in your mind, how to bring them on the table.
Anyone? Pari, you want to?
I can very well relate to that because I am myself a survivor of child sexual abuse, and it took me many, many years to finally tell my community and my family after I was already the executive director. But I was helping women that have suffered immensely from rape and sexual abuse from the Islamic State, and now all of a sudden I had to defend them while I couldn't even heal myself or talk about it because no one in our community talks about it. One thing that you need to do is keep going. In the Middle East, everything is a man's world. There's no space for women. I was one time sitting in our holy site and we had organized a presentation, and bit by bit they were pushing me, the men, pushing me off my chair, push, until I fell off of my chair. And I was so angry, I left, I went to my board members, I said, I can't take this anymore because this is obviously a different world than I'm used to, because I lived in Europe my whole life. They said, go back. I went back and I said, you have to make space for me because I organized this event. And eventually they did, reluctantly. 8 years later, I'm still here. I'm defending women's rights. You know? Thank you, I really appreciate it, but that's how it goes. If you give up, I'm sure that many would hope that our organization wouldn't exist anymore. Why? We talk about women with children born from rape. We talk about sexual violence within the community as well, not only the Islamic State. We talk about child marriage. We talk about the issues that no one else speaks of. And that is, you just keep going and they'll eventually make a seat for you. So.
Or you'll take a seat. Yeah.
Does anyone else have a question? We have some other questions?
So you are obviously young, very bright and impressive, vibrant young women, and you're talking about the ways that we can use all of these public tools. Can you talk for a minute about how that has to ultimately interact with the more traditional tools of quiet behind-the-scenes diplomacy to sort of get the job done? How one bridges that gap between, you know, TikTok and social media and op-eds, and then somebody in the State Department who maybe will have the power to actually get your guy free or to actually shake things loose or get somebody, you know, a prisoner swap arranged or some such thing.
I just like to say for the record, I think I'm a lot older than these two ladies, so, and I'm definitely not cool enough to be on TikTok, which probably makes me well positioned to answer this. And I think that in some ways is the danger of social media, is believing that eyes on your message will immediately translate into impact, because it won't. And we've all heard about clicktivism, and we all know that it's quick and fleeting and kind of like a really great dopamine hit to get 21,000 views, but doesn't necessarily mean that something is going to change. So again, I think this comes back to this multi-dimensional approach. It can only help you if you're in that meeting with someone who actually has the power and the influence to implement change. If they know that you have 4 million followers, or they know that you've gotten 500,000 signatures on your petition, but you do still need to build and nurture the relationships that are going to get you to people who can actually say to the Secretary of State, this is important. Next time you talk to the President, you need to mention this. Or the congressman who can say, or even the staffer who can say to the congressman, this is important and we should do a hearing about this. So there's a lot of things that are much glitzier than behind the room, behind the scenes in the back room conversation, but the world probably will never get away from the fact that you do need to build relationships, and you do need to be prepared to do some of that quieter and less slick and, but often ultimately more successful.
And I want to bring this, I'm going to come back to them, but thank you for bringing this home, because this is not about platforms. She just had, that's her platform, what she's effective about. A platform means social media, an op-ed, an interview on TV, a letter. This is about the messaging, but to your point, the messaging can be very different. I'm going to go back to Nigeria, okay? Congressman Wolf and I and the executive director of 21 Wilberforce went to see the Undersecretary of State, who happened to be Linda Thomas Greenfield. Does that name ring a bell? Who's now the UN ambassador. And we took the statement, I'm sorry, Icon and some of the Nigerians just came in, but we took the statement that we crafted about Nigeria, and we had a one-on-one meeting with Linda Thomas Greenfield at the State Department. And this was 6 years ago, and she said, I think the message is spot on. But I'm going to now take it and have the conversations I need to have. But what I want to ask you is, how come we're not hearing that message? Why aren't you out in front of the State Department? That helps me. You go to Capitol Hill, do you ever rally outside the State Department?
I was thinking about it.
But, so it's not that we give them cover, but it's a message then that they then can say, I have the numbers, but my message is also out there. So that vocal message gives them sometimes a license, or they have the access, whether it's a congressman, whether it's State Department, or even at a Lantos hearing. But it's how private and public and government work together. Back on to your point though, on the messaging, have you in your messaging, I know you've all met with either a diplomat or with a government official. Let's say, John, you're pretty young, maybe you haven't, but I'm kidding. You know. Have you had a one-on-one with someone where you took the TikTok and the entertainment, and tell us how you approached that in that meeting? Or
You would bring up to, a congressperson, but the way that it translates is that numbers are big when it comes to congresspersons, and as grassroots, organizations, we are always trying to gather as many people as we can to show that we are strong in numbers. And when you show petitions in front of, congresspersons, it shows that you really do have a backing, and that you're not just representing yourself and your immediate community, but a larger community at whole, an international community even, like of the diaspora, for example, of Burmese people around the world, in the United States and elsewhere. So yeah, stuff like that, bringing up the numbers and showing them, the petition asks is like an effective way of getting your message across. And then I think the way with quicktivism, as you also mentioned, is that it's not that effective, but it is an entryway into the ladder of engagement where you want people to first get that little foot in the door, and then possibly, hopefully, get more involved through that. There's the quicktivism with the petitions, but then the thing with that is we are continuing to engage with them. There's emails that people end up subscribing to through the petitions, and then they learn more, they read more, and if it really does touch them and they're really inspired to continue going more, they will end up going up the ladder, eventually sharing on social media, and then beyond sharing, starting to become more vocal about it in their own communities, start conversations and discussions, and then eventually even join forces with us to be the ones that are advocating on the Hill in Zoom meetings, and just going up that.
Pari.
Yeah, there are many conversations that we have behind closed doors, more conversations behind closed doors than actually in public. But that is really for the well-being of survivors that we work with. There have been a couple of very recently, conversations with U.S. State Department officials, National Security Council, etc., here in the U.S., regarding specific actors doing certain things, and then we've heard we will take care of it, and they do come back, and that is because we keep things behind closed doors. If we started to all of a sudden bring all this information that is behind closed doors out in the world, it wouldn't probably help us to do so. So I do agree that some conversations are much better to be behind closed doors than out in the open. But in some cases, when I said about justice and accountability, like, I notice more and more that if we don't bring it out in the public, then not much will happen. And I do have the feeling that you see also more and more that the media plays a big part when it comes to justice and accountability.
Can I say one last thing?
Yes, the pressure. Yeah.
As she was talking, she just reminded me that although we are not shown to press necessarily to their congresspersons and stuff, it does go the other way around, where sometimes, yes, conversations are best kept private, but then there's also times where, like, you know, it's good to have a little publicity, and congresspersons do appreciate being honored and appreciated. So, for example, we had this amazing opportunity to meet Senator Cardin in person, who is the author of the Burma Act, and that was a key moment that all of us were fangirling about. We went on social media immediately, posted those pictures. I created a TikTok about it that I haven't posted yet, but yeah, it was just amazing, like the amount of feedback we got afterwards. So many people in Burma were liking these pictures and commenting like, wow, this is amazing, you guys keep up the good work. So it was encouraging to us, encouraging to Senator Cardin, getting him a good image and better name across the community, and just everyone's happy, you know. Chelsea.
Yeah, I really want to pick up on something that Pari said, which is so true, which is that sometimes you have to be bold enough to know when the behind-the-scenes conversation has to go public. Because there are definitely times when you talk behind the scenes and you're told, just keep this quiet, we're working on it, and then you really come to the realization, no, you're not. You're just stalling. And so, you know, I think it's a delicate balancing act because you don't want to torpedo those relationships too, but sometimes you do have to just sort of be brave enough to say, you will not be doing anything on this unless your hand is forced, and your hand will only be forced if we go public. So, yeah, so you want to say something?
And this is where op-eds come in handy, because now you're exposing them, and then they start feeling attacked, and they're like, oh shoot, people are watching, I gotta do something. So, yeah, that's what it is.
That's true, because like when we went out with an op-ed in the Washington Post, me and another Yazidi activist, we all of a sudden heard that the Iraqi government was like scared to see what are we writing. You know, now we're going public with all our complaints, and now we're going to write about it. So yeah, again, you know when it's private and when it's public.
Another question, and then I'll get you back there, and then I'll watch our time.
Hi everyone, amazing panel. I just had a question. Have any of you ever been in a situation where you felt it was more advantageous to soften your messaging? I've found in my advocacy for the leader genocide, using the word genocide in some settings turned a lot of people off, or they didn't want to be associated with the campaign. So I'm wondering, how do you deal with that? If you ever have had to publicly or even behind closed doors?
I think when your people are attacked, you know very clearly what it is. Because when my parents told us about previous genocides and the persecution of our people, we heard the stories, but we never really saw it. So when it happened in 2014, it was very clear to us that this was a genocide. And I went to officials in Europe, and they told me, one of them said, well, we have to wait because if we really can say if it's a genocide, we have to wait until the investigation is done, etc. The investigation on this came out a few years ago, and it's almost 8 years, and this happened in 2014. So basically, this person was telling me, you have to wait for 7 years until we can finally say this was a genocide and help your people. But thank God, we had the United States, and they took the first step, and everyone was following. So yeah, you do sit in meetings where other people will turn a blind eye to your plight, your people's plight. But that doesn't mean that you should stop after that. You need to continue.
And I want to go back to something Chelsea began with, and it's not saying you shouldn't be sensitive, but if it's painful, well, guess what? So is genocide. I mean, and I know that you're probably necessarily are experiencing that, but Chelsea said it needs to be, didn't you say painful?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But I will say that sometimes you do need to adjust your messaging, right? And I'm thinking really clearly about a very important topic that the Lantos Foundation has advocated on for many years. Actually, we've done a lot of advocacy with Trent about this. And, you know, we made some good progress, and then we reached a point where we were like, this message is not right. Like, we are not succeeding with this message. The issue is still as important, but the framing, it doesn't work. Like, it's not getting us the ends that we're trying to achieve. And so I think you need to have a degree of humility to be able to say, we need to take a different approach. We need to remessage, you know, we need to actually crumple up the messaging we've been using and rethink it a little bit. And there's no shame in that. And I think anyone who's been doing advocacy for any amount of time realizes that it's a little bit trial and error.
Well, also, sometimes situations change.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
that's the answer. We have one last question, and then we'll go, okay? But we don't have a panel afterwards, so if you want to hang out, you can.
Ladies, let's model such kind of situation. We have a problem, and we're starting great activity in social media, in public area, sharing great messages and generating efforts and pressure. And second phrase, let's imagine you are given an opportunity to meet with people, figures who are the author and source of that problem, and you have to negotiate and talk with them. Do you have ever such experience, and what you can say difference between sharing messages in social media and talking directly with figures who are the author of the problem? Thank you.
I think this is an amazing question because it's something that I've definitely experienced in my Burma advocacy work. Because currently with the coup right now, the military has taken over complete control. Everyone in the country is definitely on board with rooting them out altogether. There's no one that's really for it. It's probably just a very small minority. But given that, it's a good picture to take into consideration when you are doing advocacy, because sometimes there will be people who make you doubt that, you know, you shouldn't be doing something a certain way, or that, yeah, you should maybe try to find negotiations. But no, the case right now is that no one is going to be negotiating with the military, period. And the reason why we are even in this coup is because we've done negotiations before. There's been already like 70 plus years of negotiations, and this is exactly why Burma is at the brink of, you know, just everything, genocide. Genocide has already happened. Everything's at a breaking point, and people are not having it anymore. They're so fed up, and they're saying this is literally the end game. We're gonna win, and there's no other alternative. People are already young people, even like myself, my age, people younger than myself, are already passed away for this cause and revolution. So, and none of their deaths are in vain. So, yeah, it's just, it puts everything into perspective that, yeah, when it comes to certain situations, there's just no mention of that. And I'll even put a small example of like some peace organizations or whoever that may be suggesting this may be a good alternative or this may be a good solution, but you need to know how to stand your ground and say no, like enough is enough. We already know that this is our situation. We're not going to be taking any of this, you know, craziness anymore. It's just the best way forward.
Chelsea, and then we'll go to Pari and close.
I completely agree with you when you're talking about a big cause. I think if we're getting back to religious prisoners of conscience, though, it is not necessarily a zero-sum game. You want to free a person whose freedom and life matters a great deal, and I think it's important in those situations to think very carefully about how you interact with the human rights abuser, with the oppressor, with the violator. And again, just going back to the Paul Rusesabagina example, I don't think there's anybody involved in that campaign who would view it as a loss if Paul Kagame chose to release him on humanitarian grounds. Now, that would not mean that Paul Kagame said, I was actually wrong. I actually threw him in jail completely illegally, and the trial was a sham. You know, he wouldn't be taking responsibility for all of the egregious things he's done. But I think, you know, I do think that in certain situations, you're right. There's no glossing over. There's no kind of stroking a dictator's ego about genocide. You know, we're saying, yes, let's find a common ground where we can both agree on what's happening. But when you are focusing in on these prisoners of conscience, which is the focus of this track, you know, I do think there is wiggle room, and you should be prepared to accept compromises sometimes.
Is there something you want to add, Pari? No.
We don't negotiate with ISIS, so.
Don't negotiate. Would you join me, and let me just say before we close, this is why we're here. This is why we're here. So you can clap, but the best thing you can do is take the handout, study it, be intentional, be strategic on your messaging, because that's what helps the cause, and that's why we're advocating. It's wonderful to have the community, and it's wonderful to hear the famous speeches and the progress, but they're on the ground, all of them. And Chelsea, they're advocating for on the ground. So be smart about it. We're coming off of a high, an emotional high. When you get back, be intentional. It's better to try and make a mistake and also reach out. And the last thing is, we're stronger together. So their message, as they said, amplified across things. You can also get behind them on top of your cause. I know you're all busy, but that's how we learn when we cross-pollinate. Will you join me in thanking them?